Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up With Conspicuous. Today, we are joined by the lovely Nadeem, and Nadeem is the IT director at Calisen, which we're going to learn all about today. I'm very excited to have Nadeem on because it's a slightly different twist and a different type of topic we're discussing today, so it'll be very interesting. But thank you so much, Nadeem, for joining.
Thanks, and morning, Lucy. Morning, everyone.
Well, for those that don't know a bit about you, obviously we know you're the IT director, but let's first talk a little bit about your journey, what your background's been, and how you've ended up at Calisen today.
Yeah, no problem. So, you probably can't tell from my youthful appearance, but I've been in IT for quite a while now. So it's been about 25 years or so. So after graduating with a computer science and information systems degree, I've been through various different organizations, everything from service desk lead to head of IT to systems manager, and then now joined Calisen. I've been with Calisen for nearly 12 years, actually, so quite some time. It's been quite a journey. So when I joined, we were relatively small, and now we're a much bigger group with lots of really exciting ambitions as we move forward.
Absolutely. Well, that's a nice little journey. It's nice. It's nice when you sort of see someone start from, right at the start, and then they come all the way to such senior positions like you're in at the moment, which I'm sure comes with lots of responsibility. But for those that don't know anything about Calisen, so what is it you guys do? Obviously, your role within that specific company, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
Brilliant. So it is quite a common question because not a lot of people have heard of Calisen. But actually, 40% of the UK smart meters are provided by Calisen. So although you may not have heard of us directly, a lot of people may already have one of our assets at their property. So what do we do? At a very, very simple level, we provide, as I said, smart meters. So that's our core business. So that's gas meters and electric meters. We've actually diversified and we now do other renewable energy assets, materials and assets. So we do heat pumps, we do solar, we do battery, we do EV chargers, etc. But they're all within that same asset sort of ecosystem. We've been going for over 20 years now, actually.
Oh, wow.
But as I say, our key and core asset is the smart meters that we provide around the UK. We're based in Manchester, as you can probably tell from my accent. I'm in the northwest, and we are really, in terms of as a group, we're growing quite rapidly. So we've got around 1,800 employees. Most of them are engineers, so they go around the UK actually installing meters and doing various sort of activities from a field point of view. But we do have a considerable amount of people both in Manchester and Wigan and other locations around the country as well.
Amazing. Well, who knows? If you come to the northeast, I might end up needing someone to install a smart meter into my new home. We'll see. See
Absolutely.
if we can use the services.
Always ready for that.
Perfect. So obviously, it's quite interesting because, in terms of our typical podcast guests, a lot are within Microsoft partners, etc. So it's nice to see from an end user's perspective. Now, smart meters and heat pumps, etc., are very complex in terms of the way they're built, etc., very intelligent things. In terms of your role in the company, so what is it you guys are doing behind the scenes to help Calisen?
So Archie, first of all, from a traditional IT point of view, I lead a team of over 25 people, and we cover everything from usual activities such as service desk, project management, security, development, etc. So we do all the normal, I'm going to say normal traditional IT things. But what do we do in terms of smart meters and how do we help them in terms of the adoption and rollout across the UK? We've got our own bespoke asset tracking system. And you've talked about Microsoft there. We're very much a Microsoft cloud first organization. So we track a lot of those assets using Microsoft products, and we recently integrating them into a D365 solution as well. So we're doing all of the normal, I'm going to say, technology things. But from a business point of view, what we're really keen on is making sure that the benefits of smart meters are really realized by consumers, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there.
Interesting. And would you be able to enlighten us on what those common misconceptions are, maybe?
Absolutely. So one of the things that you hear a lot about is that smart meters cost more money. And from an end user point of view, that's not the case usually. So what I mean, as I've got the one myself, so I can speak for myself as an end user, you don't pay an upfront cost for a smart meter, so there's no fear from that point of view that you're going to get slapped with a big bill for a smart meter. Secondly, it gives you access to demand-based tariffs. Again, speaking from my own personal experience, that means you get cheap rate overnight as an example. And I've got an EV, so that means I can charge my EV overnight at a much cheaper rate. And that means that, as an approximation, it's about £4.20 to fill up my car, so to speak, if that's the term.
Oh wow.
Um, so it's considerably cheaper than doing it via a normal petrol-based car if you're going to the fuel pump. So I think that's one key benefit of a smart meter, that it makes things cheaper and you can access, energy off peak, if you like. But it also gives you access to lots of other things, and we talked about some of the ecosystem that Calisen provide, but it fits in really nicely with some of the other renewable assets such as solar and battery, etc.
Okay. It's interesting you say that, because I must admit I think I'm just going off my parents and what their initial thoughts were on smart meters. But their initial thing was, yeah, I think it's going to cost more to install it. So it's, it is a misconception that still a lot of people believe. They have done their research and realize actually it's not, and they've installed one. Um, but that I think a lot of people do have that view. And I know we mentioned heat pumps as well. Is that sort of the same myth about them, or is there sort of different misconceptions about heat pumps?
Yeah, so well, actually, just I'll link back to smart meters and then I'll answer your point about heat pumps. One of the things there are genuine issues with smart meters, such as connectivity, because ultimately they have to send the readings back to a central system. So there are connectivity issues, and sometimes there's pairing issues and various other things. But actually,
Of
Calison help
course.
people to fix those issues. So they are the minority, but they tend to be the ones that get surfaced in the press. Um,
Yeah.
but as it all works well, and you talked about heat pumps, what it does mean is if you have a heat pump installed, the smart meter gives you the ability to use the off-peak rate to effectively warm your home. So it means you get the cheaper rate
Okay.
to use the heat pump to warm your home. So that's why I'm saying they all work really well together as an ecosystem. And what we recommend is that people who get a heat pump should have a smart meter, because then they can have the cheaper rates overnight, as an example. But a heat pump itself, again, there's a lot of misconceptions around heat pumps. They're very expensive to install and they don't necessarily warm your home. You might have read in the press, actually yesterday, that the government wants to sort of really force the heat pump rollout a little bit more. There's a lot more in terms of
Right.
incentives. So there is a grant that people can get hold of, and Calison will help people to do that as part of the installation. But actually, the heat pump itself, once it's in and running, will warm the house as well, as a gas boiler. It works differently, so it doesn't necessarily warm to the same temperature, if you like, but it works in
Yeah.
terms of a more consistent heat. So overall, as an end user, you will get a warm home. You use the cheaper rates overnight, etc. So there is an upfront cost for a heat pump, unlike the smart meter, because you do have to pay
Yeah.
dependent on your property and how many heat pump sort of radiators you need, or any insulation that you need. So that's all dependent on the individual circumstance. But actually, overall and longer term, they do tend to pay back as well in terms of ultimately your home bill and your wallet.
Okay. That's interesting, because I mean, from I'm just speaking from my subjective opinion. You hear a lot about smart meters and water meters, but I personally haven't heard too much about heat pumps.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to learn a little bit more about that side of things, especially if you're saying they work better as an ecosystem.
Well,
Um,
they're a lot more efficient than a gas boiler, as an example. So, and I can't
okay.
remember the stats off the top of my head, but as a gas boiler, even a modern one might only convert 90% of the energy into heat, whereas a heat pump will do something like 140%. So it's a lot more efficient than a gas or fossil fuel boiler.
Interesting. So basically, it is sort of like a replacement for your standard boiler.
Exactly, and that's what the UK government are trying to sort of roll out now across the UK. Is let's phase out some of the gas boilers, bring in the heat pumps, and as people are probably aware of, the UK doesn't have a lot of natural gas now, and we
Yeah.
tend to import it, which means that as there are sort of global price rises or any kind of issues globally, they do affect us, and it means that it costs us more money ultimately to import that gas.
Yeah.
And that's why the UK government are really keen, not just from a green energy point of view, but also from a cost point of view, for people to move to heat pumps, because then it makes us more self-sufficient from that point of view.
Absolutely. And to be honest, I know it is such a big topic nowadays because the prices have shot up across energy as a whole. Um, so is your main aim as a company just to try and make it as cost effective and reduce those costs for consumers?
100%. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. Is our mission statement, if you like, is smarter energy for all. What we're really trying to do is help the UK meet its carbon targets, and by introducing these assets out there to the UK market, it means that people can ultimately not only save money but reduce the amount of carbon emissions that we make as a country.
Absolutely. No, it's refreshing to hear that. I know, I mean, I've had many conversations. I think my last provider for energy, maybe it was EDF. I know it changed when I lived somewhere, and it's it sometimes is difficult having those conversations, but you do feel as though, and I'm going to link it to one of the comments that we've just received, but you do feel as though do the energy companies have your best interests at heart? Or because we don't have access to all of our readings unless we have that smart meter, which is why I think they're quite good to have. Now, someone has commented saying that not all customers know how to use the smart meter, and it would be helpful if an engineer took a moment during installation to show them how it works and how to set up the cheaper rate. Is that something Calisen sort of have at the forefront of their mind when doing these installations? Do your engineers take the time to explain that side of things?
It's a really good question, actually, because
Yeah.
Calisen don't actually provide the energy to the end consumer. So we're not the energy supplier, so to speak.
Okay.
Um, Now, what we can do as part of an installation, what we do actually in part of as an installation, we do a handover and make sure that people understand how the smart meter works, but depends on the energy supply as to how you get different tariffs, how that works, what the times are, what the rates are. That is variable. But one
Yeah.
of the things we are looking at is how we can help with that from an education and awareness point of view, because ultimately people can switch from one energy supplier to another, and then that would change. It wouldn't be the same necessarily,
Yeah.
but we need to make sure people have the education of how to look at that, what works for them. It might be that some energy suppliers have better tariffs for them that are more suitable for what they're trying to do. So I think what we can't do is tell people which supplier to move to, but what we can do is give people the information that they need, or help them with the information they need so they can make an informed decision.
Okay. That makes sense. I think actually it's quite an interesting point to touch upon because I a lot of people, especially from that comment, don't probably have that education. So maybe that's quite a key part that needs to be voiced a bit more to customers. Um, and I know obviously smart energy has lots of other benefits to not just household but businesses as well. Are there any other benefits we haven't touched upon just yet? I'm trying to think if we haven't covered anything yet.
Well, one of the big ones that I mean, again, particularly speaking from my own personal experience, is using solar and battery. If you add solar and battery to your ecosystem, it means that you can effectively charge your battery at cheap rates overnight, as an example, and then discharge it during the day, so you don't have to have the expensive rates during the day. So even in the winter, and we were commenting before that we don't necessarily get a lot of sunlight here in the northwest, but
Do you
even in
not?
the winter. Um, Even in the winter, we still benefit from having cheaper bills. Yesterday, as an example, I was looking at my app. I didn't consume any energy during the day at expensive rates. It was all done using my battery and solar. So again, it makes a big difference to your bills. And again, I know it's a quite a large upfront cost for people, and that's where Calison are really looking to help by looking at
Okay.
funding and how we can help people with that upfront cost for some of these devices and make sure they all link together. But when it does work as a whole ecosystem, it really helps the end user to save money on their bills. And of course, it means we're helping with net zero.
Nicely follows on to the next question. Because we hear a lot on the news. Some people listen to the news more than others. I am definitely someone who likes to avoid it because I hate the negativity that it always brings. But net zero is quite a big topic. So for those that don't know what net zero is and the meaning of it, how would you explain that to someone?
I mean, the way I'd explain it, and again, this is not my dictionary definition, but the way I like to look at these things is effectively the carbon emissions that we as a population emit. We're trying to make them neutral, if you like. So it means that we effectively emit less than we not going to say consume, but that we offset any kind of emissions that we do make. So things like trees will absorb carbon, etc. So we can utilize nature to help with some of that carbon emission. But we need to make sure where we sort of emit carbon, so that whether that's from cars, from industry, from animals, from wherever it is, that we ultimately make it neutral. So that makes, hopefully, from a climate point of view, less of an impact to the climate change. And as people may or may not know, there's a 1.5 degree tolerance that we're trying to make sure that we don't have warming that exceeds that. And if we do exceed that, that's where we get more of these natural disasters and other phenomena that people experience. And particularly in the summer, that in here we've had really hot summers and we have water issues and droughts, etc. So that's what it's all about. It's trying to make the atmosphere more sort of preserved, that we can make sure that we can ultimately not utilize all of the Earth's natural resources and make it a sort of a better future for all of our individuals and kids and grandkids, etc.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Now, I think the hardest thing for a company like yourself is actually being able to get individuals like us to change. I think some people are very reluctant to change. They still think, global warming and everything is a bit of a myth. It's not, we've always lived this way, like it will be fine. Have you, in your career at Calisen, have you seen a change to people's beliefs and their willingness to adapt, these sustainable energy sources?
Again, it's a really good question. I think we have seen changes. And
Yeah,
usually you see that through two things. Firstly, environmental things such as natural disasters, more, like say events that are causing either water droughts or excessive heat or wildfires or whatever they may be. So people see that for themselves and they say, actually, we're having more of these than we used to have. What can we do about it?
yeah,
And secondly, and going back to the financial point that we made earlier, actually, people can see by being more sustainable, we can actually save money. So I
yeah.
think those two things help people to understand that actually it does make sense to make that change.
Absolutely. I think I'm seeing a change. I mean, the amount of like electric cars you now see on the roads and stuff, you are seeing people starting to adopt these new ways of living. And it's so crucial because, as you said, the amount of natural disasters and everything happening now, like hopefully it's raising a few alarm bells to people like, actually, no, we do need to make, these changes. Now, in terms of, I know we've spoken a lot about the home side of things and homeowners adopting these ways, but do you work with larger enterprise companies and sort of helping with those type of buildings as well? Have you found a lot more adopting this type of installations, or how has that been from your perspective?
So absolutely, we do work a lot with commercial enterprises. So our Plug Me In division, they effectively do a lot of work with, I won't name the names of companies, but they've been doing some really big heat pumps with large organizations recently. They do solar farms actually. So we're getting people doing sort of mass solar deployment.
Wow.
And also, as you probably expect, there's a lot of EV charger demand for corporate sites, etc., to make sure vans or cars for corporate use have the ability to charge. So that's really a growing market for us.
Yeah, I was gonna say, has like the biggest growth in terms of installations been for the EV chargers? Would you say that's sort of been the one that's
It,
taken off a little bit more?
It's definitely something that's been prevalent, and you probably see it for yourselves, and I'm sure all of the users and then the callers are here will see that even in things like services and just generally around towns and shopping centres, etc., there's more and more EV chargers popping
Yeah.
up, which is good. We have two EVs, so I'm well aware of the range anxieties that some people have. But now there's more and more chargers out there. It makes it a lot easier for people to have that ability to charge a vehicle wherever they are.
Yeah, because I definitely think we're still in that transitional period. I know I speak to some people about electric cars and they're like, oh, like I'd never get one of them. They're more hassle than it's worth and all of this. But I do think that's just been because of like an accessibility side of things, because it's
Yeah.
been slightly newer. Of course, you're not going to be able to just pop up EV chargers left, right, and centre. It does take time to be able to install them, knowing the right areas to install them, etc. But yeah, it's funny because like I speak to a family member and they're like, I'd never get one. But I think they're starting to come around to the idea that actually they are more accessible to charge up if you're going for a road trip or whatever it may be.
Absolutely, and I'll speak for again from my personal experience. My wife wouldn't switch back now. I asked her, "Would you
Oh,
want to go
really?
back to having it?" She said no because things like now she could just plug it in overnight, so she doesn't ever have to fuel up at a fuel station. And things like that, you set them to automatically warm up in the morning, so when you get into your car, you never have to scrape the windscreen or anything like that. So the little things like that that you wouldn't necessarily think about makes life a lot easier. And yes, you do have to think about your journeys, but actually the sat navs are really good on these EVs. They know where you need to charge, when you need to charge, and how long for, etc. It plans it all out for you. And the battery technology is improving all the time, so that range anxiety is starting to drop a lot anyway. And actually, most of the journeys that people make in the country are not that long, so they're actually not going to be a problem from a battery point of view. You can normally do it. And just generally, again, from my personal experience, 95% of my journeys, I don't need to charge externally. I just do it at home overnight.
Interesting. I mean, I've only ever been in one electric car, and yeah, recently I probably experienced them in their full capacity. Like we were driving to go skiing, and I think it was about, I can't remember how far the journey was. Um, but it was just interesting to see like my partner's dad sat there and he would literally, it took him 2 seconds to sit down, look on the map and be like, oh yeah, there's the charging point. We'll stop there, have like a cup of tea or something, and it would take this long to charge up. And he just knew exactly how to sort of manage it. So once again, I think it's just a big education thing. Once you
It
know
is.
how
Yeah.
it all runs and works, it does make it a lot easier. Um, but I'm going to pick a little bit more of your IT brains from
Yeah.
your side. Now, you touched upon that you guys are users of Microsoft and their suite. I know it's specifically, can't talk today, specifically Dynamics 365 that you use. So what, in terms of that adoption, how do you use that in terms of like large scale infrastructure at Calisen?
So we've not fully deployed it yet, actually. So we're using Dynamics
Okay.
365 for both a CRM and a field services point of view. We talked about all of the assets that we installed. So fundamentally, what we're using Dynamics for is to plan the engineers' routes, make sure that we have all the relevant things that we need for the different jobs that we need to do. Make sure that we can manage all of the different types of bookings and so forth. So we're using it more as a workforce management system, and that's in progress. So we've got a number of our renewables working via the Dynamics 365 platform, but we're looking to do our meter installations via the platform later this year. So we're doing it in a phased approach. So ultimately, all of our field force will be using Dynamics 365 to just do their day-to-day operations from, as I say, out in the field, but also in the back office, some scheduling and managing all of that kind of activity.
I know I'm probably quite biased because obviously I specialize within D365, but I do I do think like the nice thing about it is it can really just you can use every part of it and it all ties together and it can just be really
Exactly.
seamless to use. Um, but once again, I know I said it at the start, it's just interesting hearing from like an end user's perspective the benefits that it can have in terms of like the productivity and it being effective at day-to-day running for things like this.
Absolutely. One of the things, one of the key items actually for the business case was the amount of efficiencies we gained from using the platform. Just enables us to route the workforce much more efficiently than we could do presently, and it gives us a lot more flexibility and scale. So we talked about all the new products and the new things that we're trying to roll out as a company. We need a platform like this to be able to scale, get out to the different parts of the UK, and to be able to have different asset types, which all have different, let's say, implications from an installation point of view and the amount of time you have to spend on site, etc., etc. So we needed that flexibility, and that's what D365 gives us.
Absolutely, and hopefully the deployment is going well and smoothly for you guys.
Yeah, so phase one is done, and we're now using it for a sort of battery and heat pumps and solar, etc., and EV chargers. So we're going to move into sort of our meter installations next. But yeah, so far it's going really well. We've got a great partner working with us. We have the support of Microsoft, and it really fits into our wider IT strategy in terms of what we're trying to do and leverage some of that cloud benefit.
Absolutely. Well, it's exciting times for the IT department anyway. So hopefully continues to be smooth, which I'm sure it will be. Now, on a slightly different note, from your side, Nadeem, I know diversity and inclusion is quite a big topic for you, and I know that you are a co-chair of Embrace. So from your side of things, one, what is Embrace, and two, why is that diversity in leadership so important to you?
Well, I think first of all, it's important to the whole group actually, and that starts from the top. So our CEO Sean Latest is very keen to make sure we've got a really diverse organisation. So it stems from
Yeah,
Sean and all the way down. So we are really keen to make sure we support all of our different diversity sort of backgrounds and so forth. But you asked about the Embrace network. So I co-chair that
yeah,
network, and Embrace is about it's a network for ethnicity and race. And so some of the things that we're looking at, for example, Ramadan starts this coming weekend. So we'll be doing a lunch and learn session next week. And that's just to make sure that we bring that awareness to our colleagues around what is Ramadan, what does it mean, what happens, etc., and what some of the practical things they can help their colleagues with during that period that may not get discussed. So we think it's a good way to just make sure it's really easy for people. And then we do things like Black History Month and various other events during the year. And ultimately, you asked about what's the objectives. The objectives are that we just want to
yeah.
make it a really safe and great place for people to work. And we talked about the area that we are. For example, I'm in Manchester. We want this to reflect to the diversity that we have outside in the city, which is a great diversity. We want our workplace to be the same.
No, I really like that, and I think it's super important to have these initiatives, in the heart of the business. As you touched upon, say Ramadan, from my perspective, I probably haven't touched upon that or refreshed my knowledge on it since maybe primary school, secondary school, when you learn about it. And it's one of those things that is important to be respectful for all the individuals around you. So I think it's really nice because as I just said, you probably, well, you're not going to remember. I don't remember stuff from primary school or secondary school too much. So it is useful and brings it back to light, I think.
Absolutely, and it's all about making sure people are comfortable. So sometimes people
Yeah.
are not sure how to support their colleagues during Ramadan, as an example. So it's just to giving that education and making a really safe space to ask questions, and
Yeah.
then it just makes it easier for everyone to work together and actually understand how they can help through Ramadan or whatever it is that people are going through at that point.
Absolutely. No, it's definitely lovely. I think businesses should definitely have initiatives like that, you know, at the forefront of their mind. I just think that it's super important. So it's nice to hear you guys are already leading the way with that, which is good. So before we sort of wrap up, I'll just note that if anyone else has any further questions or wants to know anything, then please drop a question in the comments. And of course, we can get back to you either during the podcast or after, but I'm wary of time. So Nadeem, just in terms of wrapping up now, where do you see the future of smart energy going, and maybe the future of Calisen as a business?
Well, as we touched on earlier, there's a lot of government focus around giving ourselves more control over our own energy. So it's more about having flexible grid, having less reliance on gas and so forth. So we want to support that, and not just in that space. So we're also looking. You touched on water meters, making sure we can, enable people to have smart water meters to make sure we don't have as many leaks, and we're conscious of what water that we're using also. So we're really looking to help that whole smart ecosystem, and obviously as that ramps up, that's great for us, great for the country, and that's what we're really trying to push.
Absolutely. Well, I think you guys are definitely going to be in demand as the years go by. It's always going to be an area of interest to everyone, because everyone wants to save money, especially in this day and age. So no, thank you so much, Nadeem, for just enlightening us on a topic that a lot of people do want to know about. This type of stuff. It affects people's everyday life. So it's interesting to hear what you guys are doing as a business and your aims and how you help everyone. So thank you for letting us know all that. Now, before we wrap up, I don't know if you've watched to the end of a podcast before of ours, but we always have our final question. And that is, if you were not Nadeem, the IT director at Calisen, and you weren't allowed a job in IT, what would your dream job be?
Oh, that's an interesting one. What I'd do is actually I'd be James Bond. I think there's a vacancy at the
Unbelievable.
moment.
There is. Are you auditioning?
Well, there you go. Maybe I could do an audition for that. So yeah, that would be my dream job. I think James Bond.
Love that. We haven't had that one before, so
There you
that's
go.
good.
I like to be different.
Absolutely. No, I love it. Well, honestly, thank you so much. And as I said, if anyone does have any questions, please pop them in the comments, and I'm sure we'll be happy to go back to you. But thank you for joining the podcast, Nadeem. We will stay in touch. And for everyone watching, we will be back next week for another episode.